Hi, I'm Elizabeth and today I'm here to do a tag video. This is the Reading the Humanities tag that was created by Marc from Richardson's Reads, and he's also the one who tagged me, so links to him will be found below. And I'm very glad he tagged me in this because I think it's a very interesting tag that has provoked some great answers from other people I've seen doing this tag. I'm not sure I can live up to that, but I'm gonna try. So let's just get straight to the questions that I have here on my phone. So the first question is, name a book or author who uses the field of or concepts from anthropology in their work. And I read these questions before I saw Marc's video, and my immediate response for this question was Ursula K. Le Guin. That proved to also be Marc's response when I watched his video, but I'm gonna go with her anyways. I'm just gonna choose a different book, and that's because I don't think I've read anyone whose books are so steeped in anthropology as some of her books are. And as Marc said in his video, that's probably not weird because she grew up in a home where this was very central. Her father was a renowned anthropologist. Her mother wrote a book within the field, and they had plenty of house guests who, I guess, were discussing this at all time. Marc mentioned the Left Hand of Darkness as his book. I'm gonna go with Ro Cannon's World that I read, or rather listened to, last year. It's another one where you have a surveyor from this like Federation or Union of Planets that comes to a planet to explore. And in this case, most of the civilizations on this planet are at like Iron Age level, but there is one civilization that has had contact with, let's call them extraterrestrials, before, and so they have what might be seen as an unfair advantage on this planet. And the surveyor is there to see whether they should just cut all contact with this planet and let it develop on its own accord for like a millennia or at least some centuries before they can come back to it when they are closer to being in a space age of their own. And while this surveyor is on the planet is attacked by someone else, and he sort of sets out on a quest to both help the people on this planet, but also to make it possible for himself to get back home. And saying it's a quest at the core of the book makes it sound a lot more plot-driven than it actually is, because the main point of this book really is to explore the different civilizations on this planet and how they interact with each other, and how this person from the outside sort of influences the balance of things on the planet. And it's not my favorite Le Guin novel, but I mean, it's still well worth your time. I don't think she's capable of writing a bad novel, at least from the experience I've had with her books. So question 2 is a book or author who uses archaeology in their works. I don't think I've ever read a book that's like pure archaeology, like an archaeology textbook of sorts, but I do read a lot of history books, and archaeology tends to be important source material for those. But for this I choose a book that I am currently reading, and it's this one, The Horse, the Wheel and Language: How Bronze Age Riders from the Eurasian Steppes Shaped the Modern World, by David W. Anthony. And this is a book I'm not going to hold up while I'm talking about it because it's very heavy. It's fairly big, but it's a book about the Indo-Europeans. If you know something about linguistic, you might have heard about the Indo-European language family, which both Norwegian and English and like Iranian and a lot of other languages are a part of. And these languages have in common that they are assumed to stem from a common ancestor, that there has been one language that has evolved into the multitude of languages you see in Europe and Iran and parts of India today. And it's since linguists discovered this, it's been a question to be answered, that who were these people who spoke this Proto-Indo-European language originally, when did they live and where did they live? And this have at times been a controversial topic because people have tried to use this information for their own benefit, like the Nazis in the 1930s. But really it's it's a neutral question. If this language existed, it was spoken by someone at some place at some time. And what this book does is trying to figure out who and when and where. So far I'm about 170 pages in, and I'm finding it very interesting, but it is very, very information heavy. It starts off with the linguistic part, and then it also uses a lot of both anthropology and archaeology to try to figure out these questions. And it's probably the most technical archaeological book I've met so far, which means that I'm reading this very slowly because there is a lot of things to take in and a lot of things that are quite foreign to me, but I'm really enjoying it. As I said, I'm expecting I'm going to talk more about this book when I've actually finished it. Then I'm going to be a bit rebellious and swap the places of the next two questions because I think that's going to make this video flow a lot better. So question 4 is history. Do you have a favorite historical period you enjoy reading about? If so, what is it? Any books that stand out? So I've already stated that I read a lot of history books, and for me there are 3 periods in time that stand out, and I thought I was going to just quickly go through them in the way that I discovered them. And the first historical period that I got into reading about was Tudor England, and it all started with this book for me. This is a Norwegian book called Livet med Elisabeth, or Life with Elizabeth, by Richard Herman, who was a news correspondent living in London. And he was in love with everything British, and he sent home a lot of reports to Norway about Britishness, about British history and culture and all these kinds of things. He was sort of a famous voice on the radio, but he also wrote books. And I think I picked this book up when I was, when I was 12, 13, and I picked it up because I shared a name with this famous queen. And I fell in love with British history through this, because Richard Herman has a very, very approachable way of writing history. It feels like all the people he mentions are like his next door neighbors and that they can pop by for tea at any point. And it's very charming, and he also points out all the quirks and the funny stories. And I reread these as an adult after having read a lot more about this period in time, and they are sort of flimsy and maybe not the most accurate historical books, but they were a great introduction and a great way to get introduced to history as something living, breathing, and being about people that are actually like you and me, or maybe with a bit more power in her hands in this case. But this really got me interested in history to begin with. And then the second period of time that I sort of fell for, if you can say that about an historical period, was the Viking Age. And I talked a lot about that in my videos during Sagalang, so I'm not going to talk a lot more about that today. But I have one book that I keep coming back to again and again that I'm gonna push from this period, and it's not actually a book. It is one single poem that's part of the Poetic Edda, but I have it here as a book of its own, and it's Volus på. I think it's called The Seer's Prophecy, often in English, and it's the poem that sort of encompasses the entire world view of the Norse mythology. It talks about the beginning of the world, it talks about how the world is organized, and it also tells the story about how the world is going to end and a new world arise from it. So this is a book I keep coming back to. It's not very long because it's just one poem, it's not a lot of text, but I really love it and I know parts of this by heart. And then the third period I'm sort of voraciously reading about is ancient history, and by ancient I mean pre-Greece and Rome. for me this was a revelation when I read linguistic books and historical linguistic books, when I realized just how much written sources we have from like 2000 BC, and that just opened a whole new world to me, and I love reading about the ancient Mesopotamian world. And one of the early books I read in this that I think is very good and worth reading is this one. It's called Mesopotamia, The Invention of the City by Gwendolyn Lake. And well, it is what it says on the tin. It talks about how the first cities arose and how they were organized and the relationships between them. And I did find this very interesting. And that again leads me to question 3, which is, have you read a work from ancient Greece or Rome? If so, what was it, and do you have a favorite author or work? And the short answer for this is no, I haven't, because I've always been so into other historical periods that I've completely ignored Greece and Rome. And that feels like a huge gap in my reading that I plan to do something about. I have certainly bought a lot of books that belong to this period, and I sort of started late last year to read The 12 Caesars by Suetonius, and I've read about the first 2 Caesars mentioned in this, and I found this very, very readable. But still, I don't think this is the best place to start with reading about Roman history, because this really presupposes a lot of knowledge that I don't have. I have read some Greek myths, but I've always been most interested in the Old Norse stuff, so haven't really been into that either. So I guess my favorite book from this time period, or dealing with this time period that I've actually read, would be SPQR by Mary Beard, which I read last year, and I felt that this was a very good introduction for me. It's very detailed, it's a good overview, and yet it's still not mired down in too much detail to make it readable for someone who is fairly new to this as a topic. This, of course, deals with Roman history. So for question 5, I'm going to be a bit rebellious again. The question is, linguistic or languages? Reading is about language, among other things. What is your favorite translated work of literature? And I don't want to answer this. To me, the dichotomy between translated fiction and untranslated fiction is a false one. It's all just fiction. I don't care what language it was originally written in. And growing up in a small language community that Norwegian is, it feels a bit weird talking about translations in the way that English-speaking people do, because in Norway, the majority of the books published are translations, a lot of them from English, granted, but they are still translations. I'm going to do my own take on this question because linguistics is my field, and I do read a lot of books about language and about linguistics. So instead of talking about translated works, I'm going to show you a book about translation, and it's this one. It's called Is That a Fish in Your Ear? The Amazing Adventure of Translation by David Bellows. And if you want to know more about the act of translation, the challenges, the history of it, you can read this book and find out. I thought this was very good. Now let's get into the part of the questions where I don't have ready answers. Question 6. Law and politics. Do you read political books or books related to the law? What are your favorites? The short answer here, no, not really. I do read some biographies that are of politicians, but that tend to be like historical politicians, not much about present day. And I don't really read law books unless they deal with like Hammurabi's law, which is just slightly outdated. So historical politics and law, yes, but contemporary, not so much. Question 7 is the hardest one in this entire tag. It's literature does not have a universally accepted definition. What is yours? And I don't know. I haven't really thought about this much. I've tried to figure something out. I wanted to have it open-ended, so it includes whatever. and it always ends up being too open-ended. Let's go with literature is words put together with creative intent. That's probably still too wide, but that's my answer for this. Question 8. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. Have you read a work of philosophy? Do you have a favorite? I can't say I have read an entire work of philosophy. I've read some bits and pieces. There's a compulsory course for all Norwegian university students that's all about philosophy. So I did read like excerpts and stuff from original material there, and I have read some books that sort of some textbooks that look at philosophy in a broader scale, comparing philosophers and stuff like that. But I haven't, as of yet, read an entire work of philosophy written by a philosopher. That's also something I might want to try to change. But I would say my favorite work of philosophy that I have read is this one at the Existentialist Cafe, Freedom Being and Apricot Cocktails by Sarah Bakewell, which goes into the existentialist movement. I was going to say movie. The existentialist movement in Paris. And I think this was a very good combination of individual biographies, but also going into the actual texts of the movement and analyzing them and pointing out the main points of the existentialism philosophy. So this really made me want to read more about both existentialism and other philosophical movements. So maybe the answer to this question would be better if you ask me again in a couple of years' time. So question 9 is about religion. Name a book or author that you have read that has influenced your own personal view of religion. And this is a hard one to answer because I'm not a religious person, nor have I read a lot of overtly religious books. I've read a lot about mythology and myths from various kinds of belief systems, but that has not been as a quest for finding religion myself. That's more interest in the actual stories and the system of stories and thinking about how this influenced people way back when. So that's not really religious reading in my view. But I think the one writer that I've read that overtly discusses a lot of religious topics in her works is the Norwegian writer Vera Henriksen. And she wrote a lot of books about those crucial years in Norwegian history where the belief in the Old Norse gods disappeared or was replaced by Christianity. And in her books this is always a central topic, and it's also a topic that's widely discussed. It's something that are near and dear to the hearts of the people in her novels, either because they want to remain within the old belief system and fights the oncoming Christianity, or because they have accepted the new faith of Christianity and are asking a lot of questions and trying to figure out how this fits into their world. So this is as close as I got to religious reading, I think. Then for question 10, performing arts. Musicology, theatre and dance often put the performer front and center. Do you have a favorite performer? If so, who is it and why did you appreciate their work? Is there a book about this performer? I'm drawing a blank here. When it comes to music, I'm very basic. I have heard of the most famous artists and I've heard about their 3 most famous songs. And I will listen to the songs that I find over and over and over again. I'm very bad at finding new stuff. I'm just not that interested in music. It's background noise and normally I prefer peace and quiet to music. And as for theatre and dance, that's something I'm not very involved in either. Every time I go to a play, I think that I really like this, why don't I do this more often? And then I wait another 5 years before going to a play again. So I don't have a favorite performer in that sense. The closest I can get to an answer to this is that there's this slam poet that I've watched several times now. He's called Fredrik Høyer and he's from the same place as I am. Don't know him, but I've seen him on stage and I really like seeing him perform his slam poetry. And I don't think there's a book about him, but he himself has published several books in Norwegian. So for now I think he's probably my favorite performer. So question 11 is visual arts. Do you have a favorite visual artist or media type? Do the two relate? Are there any books that addresses this relationship between artist and medium? No. Just no. I'm sorry, I've never been that into visual arts. I would probably say that my favorite medium would be the graphic novel, because that's something I can relate to, but I don't have a favorite illustrator there either. I do like the illustrations of the Norwegian illustrator Lisa Isato. I've shown this picture once before, but really when it comes to visual art I am fairly clueless. I would say I prefer in general photography and graphic design to paintings. But that's just because I don't know better. I don't know anything. I don't know where to start. So then all that remains is to tag someone. I want to tag Silje because I'm tagging her in anything she hasn't tagged me in already. I want to tag Marc Nash because I think for once I have done a tag before you have. And I think you're gonna have way more interesting answers to this than me. The same with Ulla. I think your answers to this would be very interesting to listen to. I'm gonna tag Sophie, P, and Sean, and Bert if you want to do this, because I think you can have answers to all the questions I didn't have good answers for as well. And yeah, I want to tag Justin from Triumphal Reads, because I think his take on this tag would be very interesting. And that's all for now. Until next time, bye bye.